All right, everybody. Welcome to the second Friday edition of the Leadership Boom with your host, Ricardo D. Rice. Okay, listen. So I'm still getting acclimated to having 2 days a week, which I should get more acclimated to because it's getting ready to be 5 days a week. Yeah, that was a little throw out there. It's getting ready to be 5 days a week, probably in another couple of weeks. It's definitely less than a month. So I'm really excited, but I'm really excited today because we have a lot of new stuff and a lot of new things going on. So first and foremost, I have a new correspondent, Mrs. Simone Price. So we're happy to have her today.
Thank you.
All right, so tell them a little bit about yourself.
My name is Simone Price. I'm originally from Oregon. My background is politics, and it's all I've ever worked in. So I've done a lot of fundraising, grassroots organizing, a little bit of speaking, and a lot of lobbying and government affairs work. I don't like to put myself in a box, but I'm definitely a pro-liberty-minded person, and I'm really, really excited to be here now that I'm back in Atlanta pretty much full-time. So thank you so much.
Yeah, she's kind of the secret answer to a prayer. I didn't tell her that because I like, for most people that know me, they know that my undergrad is pre-law political science. So I actually was going to go to law school, decided not to, got an MBA, finishing a doctorate, all that good stuff. So I've always wanted somebody on the show that kind of understands politics on the level that I do. So she's kind of the answer to a prayer. Don't let your head get big. I didn't really want to say that. They kind of slipped out.
Well, okay.
But it's fine. It's fine. So on her first run, she gets to be on the show with an up-and-coming politician, which I don't like that word up-and-coming, but we're going to use it for a namesake today. So we have with us today Mr. Flynn Broady. We're happy to have him today.
Thank you.
All right, so tell us about yourself.
Well, let me start with, first I'll say this country, I love this country. I grew up wanting to be in the military, spent 26 years in the military.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Definitely.
I'm a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. I had an opportunity to go to law school while I was teaching ROTC at Seton Hall University, graduated from Seton Hall with a law degree. Once I left the service, came here to Cobb County, Marietta, Georgia, and started working with Cobb County in the assistant solicitor general. Very much enjoy myself being a prosecutor. As I look back on my time, one of the things I realize is that we are so much more alike than we are different. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to run for Congress. Because now the media, the newspapers, social media, print media, everything that you can think of in the administration in Washington, everything you see and hear is talking about how different we are, how much we hate one another. And so one of the things I wanted to do was take a run at Congress, hopefully be the change that we need in this country to bring everybody back together so that we can move on one accord and continue to make this country what it's supposed to be.
I feel like I should stand up and applaud.
Very nice.
I feel like I should stand up and applaud. I was not expecting that. Okay. All right. So the person you're running against is Laudermilk.
Yes.
So I wasn't going to go there, but since you gave this very long intro, which is very good, I feel like I should just jump right into it. So we're going to do just that. All right. So outside, we were talking about the way it's zoned. And it's really weird. For those that don't know, it's the 11th district. So it's really weird. It covers like fragments of 75, fragments of 575. It's the weird. I've never seen anything like it. I can't even. Give me your thoughts on it. Because for those that do not know this, everything is zoned. For those that don't understand politics, we feel like we don't have interest in it, but you should. Everything is zoned. And, it's how they decide where you vote. It's how they decide all this good stuff. So explain to me your thoughts on the way this is zoned.
First, I'll start off with telling you exactly what the 11th district covers. It covers all of Bartow and Cherokee counties. It covers Cobb County west of 75, the Ackworth, the Kennesaw, the Marietta area, all the way down to just north of Macklin Road. It covers Smyrna, it covers Vinings, it covers a little bit of Sandy Springs and a little bit of Buckhead. Now, why does it cover all that stuff? We have to go back to the Georgia State House, where the Republicans have had their way of the land for probably about, I think, over 15 years now. And basically, while they were in power, they gerrymandered the districts in their favor, protecting their incumbents in order to make sure that it continues to stay a Republican district based on the voting patterns of the historically of the area that it's covering.
Okay, like I said, it's quite interesting, and if anybody has the free time, I promise you, it sounds like I'm making it up, but I'm really not. I'm sitting here looking at it, and it's because it doesn't even cover the whole like little area. So like Marietta's not fully
but
covered.
Not really.
Yeah, it's like Smyrna's covered, but it's not fully covered. It doesn't even touch Sandy Springs. It doesn't touch East Cobb, Roswell, none of those areas. It's the weirdest thing, but it covers like these what I would call country areas: Cartersville. Somebody says I've never even heard of Waleska, Ball Ground. The only one I kind of know is Canton, which I'm actually shocked that it covers Canton. But okay. All right. So in any event, like I said, it just threw me off when I saw it because I was telling someone, I was like, what in the world? Because I wanted to look it up. I was like, what in the world? How do you get away with something like this? But again, if there's no legislation that hinders it or people not paying attention, this is what happens.
Well, when your party is in power, you have the opportunity to redraw the district lines as you please. And because you can vote on them and your party has the majority, that's why they end up like that. Former Attorney General Eric Holder, he's working on something hopefully to try to get the country away from that so that the districts can be drawn more fair. The Supreme Court has said that they're allowed to do this. As long as they don't do it by race or ethnicity, they can draw party lines according to parties if they choose to.
It's the most obscene thing I've ever seen in my life. But here we are.
Yes.
All right, so we're going to get out of that because we have a full hour with Mr. Broady. So we're going to get back to that later on. In current events, which is what I'm actually going to do today, we're going to do some current events. So I have one federal and I have one local. So in the federal one, everybody knows about Puerto Rico and the fact that it was hit by Hurricane Maria and all that good stuff. And FEMA has still been sending money and taking care of a lot of things. And I don't think a lot of us knew the dynamics of how that actually works. So in an article I saw today, it says that FEMA wants Puerto Rico to pay for a part of its recovery. All right, so here are the facts for those that don't remember and don't know. So Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico on September 20th. That is not right. How does that have September 20th? 2017. That should be 2017. September 20th, 2017. The hurricane sustained winds of 250 kilometers per hour at landfall and killed at least 55 people. It followed Hurricane Irma, the most powerful Caribbean hurricane on record. The ensuing damage is estimated to up to $95 billion and has left them in a healthcare crisis. The hurricane devastated its power grid and water infrastructure, which is why we keep hearing about them not having clean water, no electricity, all that terrible stuff. Puerto Rico owes creditors more than $70 billion, with an additional $43 billion owed in pension payments. FEMA, which we hear that all the time, which stands for Federal Emergency Management Agency, has said that the emergency, and I'm using air quotes for those that can't see me, is over and started scaling back financial assistance. Apparently, FEMA just denied a request from the island's governor for the federal agency to continue covering 100% of the emergency work, including power registration, debris cleanup, and other areas. FEMA has said that going forward, it will cover 90%, and the other 10% will be covered by them, which is estimated to be about $100 million. In reality, because when I kept doing more research, this is actually a very good scenario because apparently typically FEMA covers about 75% of the cost of emergency response services, while local governments are typically responsible for 25%. So before everybody jumps in and goes, oh my God, we should be doing 100%, when you do the research, technically FEMA only covers 75%, and we've been doing 100%. So do we feel like this is fair? And I'm asking my panel guests today, do we feel like this is fair to say that we're fastly approaching a year later, and we've been covering 100% of this emergency cost, which is run us into billions, and now we're asking them to come up with 10%? Is that fair?
So for me, it's not really a question of fairness. It's just kind of a necessity. Like the reason it's called an emergency response is because it's there for emergencies. And Hurricane Maria still killing people. I think 4,300 was the estimated number in September. But 3 million people plus have been affected by it. There's still lack of electricity, still issues with water. Puerto Rico is bankrupt, officially bankrupt. They've been going bankrupt for some time. They've had financial problems for some time. Municipal bonds have not been a good investment for some time. But now they're actually having to offload a lot of their key pieces of infrastructure. Like right now, I think they're in the process of moving a lot of their inmates from the island to parts of America, places where most of the inmates can't even speak English, let alone now having to move away from their families where they can see on a regular basis. It's that bad there. So they're in a lot of financial trouble. I really take a lot of issue with the way it's been handled from the beginning. It kind of makes the financial argument mute. Like the response to Harvey in Texas versus the response to Maria in Puerto Rico is very, very different in terms of timelines. Like I think it took about a week to get about 70 helicopters over to Houston, but it took about 43 days to get the same amount of helicopters to Maria, or to respond to Maria in Puerto Rico. You know, our president has made a lot of comments as well about whether or not Puerto Rico should be responsible for their own issues as though they're not a U.S. territory. And Puerto Ricans on their own, they're on an island, but they're on an island, so they can't vote in the same way that we can, but they have, you know, taxes and financial obligations just like we do. I just feel like this is not the best time to ask ourselves, should Puerto Ricans be independent? Like, an island nation can be independent when things are going great, not necessarily when they're expensive, and not after a humanitarian crisis. Like, this is, I think, kind of ugly.
And I agree with Simone. If we look at Hurricane Katrina, what happened when we were in New Orleans, how fast, how much aid that we provided, how New Orleans is back on its feet, Louisiana is doing great. When we look at Puerto Rico, what's the difference? Why have we not gone to Puerto Rico and done the things that we should have done? I believe just this week did they get electricity all over the nation. There are still people who have to go to actually fly from Puerto Rico to the United States to receive health care. You know, these things, this should not happen in the United States. And Puerto Rico is a territory, but it is still part of the United States. Every person born on that island is a United States citizen. And so we need to treat them as such. We need to make sure that they have the basic necessities in order to live. When we don't do that for them, how can we say, okay, in New Orleans, we're going to do it for New Orleans? Or just recently our farmers who need to be bailed out. How are we helping our farmers if we can't help Puerto Rico do the things that they need to do? Where are our priorities? We should always be trying to help our citizens to make sure our citizens are at least able to sustain just the minimum necessities. And right now we're failing at that.
I guess my question becomes, when I was in school, because I'm older than I look, so when I was in school, you know, we were always taught that, oh, the United States is a superpower, and especially after Russia was broken up, and, you know, we're the world's police. Does that still hold true? Like, are we still held in that same regard, especially now with having the administration that we have? Or has that changed?
I believe that has changed quite a bit. We're not looked at as a standard bearer anymore. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to run for Congress, is because my love for this country, my love for what this country represents, my love for what this country is supposed to be about, that's not showing up right now. The things that we're seeing out of this administration, the divisiveness, the fact that we're calling other nations names, the fact that we're abandoning our friends and taking up arms with our enemies, something is wrong here. And it's reflected in everyday things. Right now, we've got bills in Congress that want to reduce the amount of money that we provide for Medicare, Medicaid, want to reduce the amount of money we provide for food stamps, want to reduce the amount of money that we provide for assistance for our social programs. Why are we doing this? Why are we not looking out for the least of our citizens? There's an issue here. And the issue is that we're promoting that the rich need to be richer, while the poor will just see if you can get by with what we give you. And that's not the way this country was founded. That's not what this country is all about. And we need to change that.
Thoughts?
I mean, I'd like to kind of get a little bit more of your perspective about this administration and its direction, because I think a big piece of that, when you talk about America's state or America's being a beacon on a hill for the world, that's one conversation. But I think it's another thing when we're talking really about Puerto Rico and also kind of about the economies of scale in our own country. So you mentioned a little bit about class, about poor being poor and wealthy people being wealthier. And I know that's a big thing for you, and it's part of changing the narrative. But our president has said a couple of times, and then retracted a couple of times, that he does support kind of uplifting things like the minimum wage, like getting people to $15 an hour or something similar to that. So it kind of brings me not only in disaster situations, but even in everyday situations. Georgia's usually at the tail end of all those conversations. We are usually the last state to do anything like that. We were one of the last states to move to 725, where we currently are. So maybe a little bit more about your background, where you traveled, where you've been. Like, how do you see Georgia, and how do you see even an island nation like Puerto Rico in comparison to the Germanys of the world, other places that you've been. I mean, you've spent a lot of time, I think, in southern states. But on the national field, I think Georgia's so far behind. Puerto Rico even more so, I would think.
And you're right. Georgia is behind in many things. One of the things that you see, let's take California or New York, for instance. Both of them are solid Democratic places. Both of them probably have some of the biggest economies in the world. And I think Georgia was fifth, I believe, in the entire world, not just the United States, but in the entire world. Why are those economies like that? Well, in order to foster the economy, we need people to spend. Well, if we continue to enrich the rich, most of them are at their current spending level, what they're going to spend. The rest of it is invested, placed in other markets. Well, if we continue not to give money to the poor, continue not to raise wages, those people are at their limit and they can't spend anymore. So what do? We're halting the economy because we have a lack of spending to produce goods and all those things. Right now, we just saw the GDP 4.1% over the last quarter. A lot of that had to do with the threat of tariffs. So a lot of countries were buying stuff from the United States in order to make sure that they didn't get those things taxed through the tariffs to make them cost more. And they did that ahead before the tariffs took place. Now, next quarter, this quarter that we're currently in, and in the following quarter, if things don't change, they're not going to be buying as much. So you're not going to see the growth in GDP. You're not going to see him get 3% for the entire year. And so that's going to be an issue for this country. The Tax Act that reduced taxes, it provided a lot of money for corporations. It provided a lot of money for the rich. The money that it provided for the poor was very, very little, very little. And I guarantee you, come April next year, you're going to see a lot of people having to pay taxes that normally where they didn't pay taxes. That money was reinvested into the stock market by buying back their shares, inflating their share prices without actually giving money to the people who would actually spend it. And so that's halted the economy even further than where it should be at right now at this point in time. Trump likes to take a lot of credit for the current state of the economy, but he's got to remember that this economy has been moving forward for the past 8 years. So well into the Obama administration, those policies that he put in place has helped this economy continue to grow from the Depression of 2008, 2009. We need to go back and we need to look at some of those regulations that were put in force to make sure that things continue to go on the smooth, straight and narrow. Because right now, if we don't continue to do that, we're going to see another collapse, and it may be sooner than we think if things continue to go the way they are. Because right now, the normal American is not spending money like he should be. We're using more credit than ever. The nation is going to borrow more this year than it ever has borrowed. And why is that? Because of the tax cuts. Because we're not bringing in the revenue that we need to pay for the things that we need to pay for. And for conservatives, their big thing is fiscal responsibility. So they want to reduce the debt. Well, that's not happening. The debt is continuing to increase at record numbers.
So really quick, so I have a question about that, because when you talk about tax cuts, and I also think the amount of taxes that you pay, how you make your money, that all influences taxes. So, just touching again on the emergency situation, I think the moral of the story there is that when there's an emergency, it just exacerbates every other issue, right? So whatever problems there were before, they get 10 times worse once you're in an emergency situation. But there's a middle area here in between being on the far left side and where you say, okay, well, there's a wage issue. People are not making enough money in the jobs that they have, and then being on the far right side where you say, okay, well, we just need to make sure that businesses can do as much as they can do without regulation. There's a middle area here, and it doesn't really touch on, I don't want to say personal responsibility, but a little bit of financial literacy too. Like, we're a nation of borrowers, and those borrowers include lower and poor class Americans. But for that same reason, that same group of people does not save, does not invest, does not participate in the same vehicles that other people do, even middle-class Americans do. I think the average American doesn't have $400 right now to cover expenses. So my question is more so, why isn't the goal to grow not the amount of wages, but grow the amount of opportunities, grow the amount of jobs, versus making sure that people can get paid more in the jobs that they have? Like, where does that middle ground enter between like just the access to opportunity or access to business or capital?
I think it goes back to the fact that under most Republican administrations, there's a goal to enrich the rich. No matter how much you make as a company, if you only have to pay $7.25 an hour, that's your choice. And we're in an economy where basically education determines a lot. You know, guys and girls with high school educations, they can't command too much of a salary, which is sad. Those with college degrees are even finding it harder to command the salaries to pay back their student loans. Those with my daughter is a health science graduate. She's been told that if you really want a job in this field, you have to have a master's degree. And this is a field that probably starts in the $40,000 to $50,000 range. High school graduates should be able to make $40,000 a year, because that's what you're going to need to have a living wage to even provide for you and your family, at least that much. The middle ground, when it came to the tax cuts, we could have made the tax cuts say, okay, your tax cuts will be reduced, your tax amount will be reduced based on how much growth you've shown, how much jobs you've shown, how much benefits you provided to your employees. There are different things or different ways that could have been written in order to secure what he was trying to do, enrich the rich, but also take care of the poor. It's a sad day in America when many employers say, okay, you're only going to work 35 hours a week. And why? So I don't have to pay you benefits. So now we've got all these people that are working 35 hours a week at one job, 35 hours a week at another job, working two jobs to just make ends meet. And the consequences of this is we have kids at home who don't get raised by their parents, get raised by the streets, have more discipline problems. More discipline problems means they learn less in school, which kills their chances for even getting a good job, getting good employment. So it's a lot of things in there that the middle ground has to. Our employers have to say, in order to make sure I foster a good relationship with my community, these are the things that I need to do. I need to provide full health care. I need to provide daycare. As a state, we need to provide aftercare programs. As a federal government, we need to subsidize those aftercare programs. In order to make sure we put that investment on the front end, so on the back end, we don't worry about kids not going to high school. We don't worry about kids doing drugs because they ain't got nothing else to do. We don't worry about kids not going to college because we provided them the groundwork to make it to college. There's a lot of things that we as a nation, we take for granted. We take for granted that everybody has opportunity. Well, in retrospect, we do have opportunity. But the fact is, many people don't see that opportunity. They don't get to reach that opportunity because they have not laid the groundwork to make it happen.
So can you talk about the difference for you? Because we also didn't get into, I think, a lot of your background. What's the difference for you from where you're from, how you were brought up? What do you kind of see as those big barriers? Because you're very well educated, and I don't know if loans were required, if you've have any personal experience with the student loan trap that we're currently talking about, but I think there's a fine line between the argument, I think, in the 60s and even 70s was that college was unattainable, and it was, for most people. College tuition was expensive then, relatively. Now it's prohibitive for a lot of people, but there are loans that are made available to students regardless of their background. But now the crisis is that there are degrees on top of degrees out there. Everyone has a bachelor's degree in a lot of places. But that doesn't mean that that's viable, that it's going to guarantee them income. It doesn't mean that whatever job there are for them are going to produce the same amount of value as those degrees cost. Being debt-free was not a part of the promise. If you ask our president, being debt-free is not necessary to be a rich person. So, where does the line go between providing things and then those things also coming with their own strings? At a certain point, doesn't it have to be about the value that's created? Versus, the credentials? And if it is about the credentials, then can you talk about your own path and how you managed to get an education?
Okay. I went to an inner city high school. Our high school was literally across the street from the projects. Police station was about 3 blocks down. Every day we had the police at our school because things were happening. Kids were getting hurt, kids were getting in fights, kids getting raped, all kinds of things. So it was a pretty bad high school for all those who looked from the outside. What they couldn't see was how good our teachers were. We had some awesome, phenomenal teachers who really cared about our students. And they pushed us. Those who wanted to stay in school, those who wanted to learn, they pushed us. And a lot of that has to do with your parents too, because your parents, if your parents just let you slide through school, they're doing wrong. You know, my mom, she was one of those that, you know, if I came home with a B, I got questioned, why do I have a B? You know, so she was very into what we were doing in high school, making sure that I made good grades, making sure that I could move forward from there. I went to Tennessee State on a full scholarship for electrical engineering. Most of my life I'd always wanted to be a soldier, so I left Tennessee State after a year and joined the Army. I did 26 years in the Army. Luckily for me, the Army has the GI Bill, and that's what I use for most of my education, and it's a long list here. I got an associate's degree from Victoria College in Victoria, Texas. I got my bachelor's degree from Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. I went to law school at Seton Hall Law up in Newark, New Jersey. I also came, after I left the Army, I used the rest of my GI Bill to get a master's in public administration from Kennesaw State University. So in retrospect, I'm very lucky that I didn't have to incur financial obligations to get school.
Wait, question, real quick. So the GI Bill covered all of that?
The GI Bill covered all my
I should have went in the military.
Right.
Because I'm
Right.
on that same rock. I have an associate's, a bachelor's, a master's, almost finishing a doctorate, and 2 certificates. I don't even open my statements anymore because it makes my heart hurt. So I wish I had gotten. I didn't know the GI Bill extended that far. I thought it covered like the bachelor's and maybe the master's.
26 years, a lot of service. I mean,
26 years is a lot of stuff. Now while I was at Seton Hall, because I was faculty at Seton Hall, half my credits were paid for, and the GI Bill paid for the rest.
So 2 pieces there, though. You talked about teachers. You talked about adults who took an active interest in kids. And you said parents. I think you said plural, so you have 2, which is a minority now because most black kids now do not have 2 parents. I think
Well,
52%. So, but can the government really do anything about those 2 things? Is there really enough money to replace those 2 things?
I think so. We have to
To
remember.
replace parents?
Not necessarily to replace parents,
Replace
but
parents.
to put kids in a position where they can better themselves. We have to do the upfront investment. If we don't do the upfront investment, we're asking for long-term problems. And that upfront investment is, you know, starting here in Georgia, making sure kids are ready to go to school. Pre-K programs are one of the most awesome things that we can have because it prepares those kids to be in a learning environment before they actually go to school. We have to provide after-school programs for kids. And when I say after-school programs, when I was growing up, the big thing that we did is we played sports. I mean, I played every sport under the sun. Every day after school, I was going to practice. I had a coach who was a mentor, who talked to us, who did things, told us about things, about life, so that we would keep our head on straight. We had a Boys and Girls Club in Birmingham, Alabama. Literally every day, we were at the Boys and Girls Club, around adults who provided good examples of who we should be. And like I said, my mom was, you know, my dad wasn't there. My mom was totally involved in everything that we were doing, and she did that with all our brothers, my brothers and sister. If we provide that upfront investment, you know, provide money for the pre-K, provide money for the after-school programs, kids will come out of school in a better position than they do right now. In the 1960s and 1970s, when we started going to 2-income families where both parents had to work, things started, morally, we started a downward trend because of the fact that we just didn't have that supervision that we had once upon a time. And they always say it takes a village to raise a child. We don't see that in America as much as we used to. When I was growing up, my grandmother literally we lived on 33rd Street. My grandmother lived on 34th Street. All my aunts lived on 32nd Street. There wasn't nowhere I could go and get in trouble. Because if I did, somebody was going to see me. But we don't have that nowadays. We don't see that in our kids. I mean, how many of us even actually know our next door neighbor? You know, it's amazing.
Weird vote.
I just moved, so I don't know. It's fine. All right, so on that note, we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to have more of Congressional hopeful Flynn Broady. Stay tuned on the Leadership Band with your host, Ricardo D. Rice.
Never knew my life could be this way. I never knew the sun could shine all day. Never thought I'd live beyond my past until I found Jesus. I never thought I'd be in this place. Oh, I'm glad, so glad I'm living my life in this place. Ooh, I never knew my heart would feel again. You see, I was so hurt, never knew the pain. Let me stand. Never thought the tears would go away. Never thought my tears would go away. Until I found you, Jesus. I never thought I'd be right here in this place. Oh, I'm so glad. Yes, I am. I'm living my life. Oh, Lord. There's a place in God where we can all be free. A place where God can get the best out of me. There's a secret place in God where He covers me. Oh, I am so glad. Yes, I am. I'm living my life in this place. Been a lot of places, seen a lot of faith, but I've never been in this place. Time and time, I never thought I'd win. Oh, Lord, been a lot of places, seen a lot of people. Oh, Lord, been in this place, time and time again. Never thought I'd win. I've been around the world, seen a lot of people.
All right, everybody, we are back on this week's Friday edition of the Leadership Band with your host, Ricardo D. Rice, and my new correspondent,
Simone Price.
and our very special guest, Mr.
Flynn Broady.
All right, so when we left, we were talking about education. Can you remember to finish your thought, or do I need to go somewhere else? Because you were like in the middle of something. Do you remember what it was?
I'm trying to think.
Because we didn't listen to gospel music in the break and have 5,000 conversations. So if you don't, it's fine. Okay, so this week I was privy to attend the Critical Issues Forum by the Georgia Partnership of Excellence in Education. And one of the things they were talking about was the retention of teachers, particularly in rural areas. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the big things for teachers anywhere is retaining good teachers, and we have to provide incentives. And lots of times we have to sort of take our hands off, because sometimes right now we've tied teachers up by saying you got to teach this test in order to be graded and told that you're doing a good job. So it sort of hems them up and doesn't allow them to actually teach children concepts and things like that, instead of teaching them memorization. And for our rural areas, it's definitely important. Unless we're bringing kids who grew up there back to teach, it's hard to keep teachers there because it just doesn't appeal to them. Normally they pay less, they don't provide as many benefits, so it would work and help better if we had something on a national level where teachers could buy into, as far as something similar to a teachers union here, especially here in Georgia.
That would be a nice thought. We were also talking about, I read an article the other day that was talking about the shortage of labor in fields like electricians, welding, things like that. What are your thoughts on, because I know I'm from South Carolina, so I went to a technical school, and I know that you have too. And at my technical school, they had a bridge program to really help those particular areas get the labor people they need to have the skill sets, the electrician, all that good stuff. I don't really see that here. So what are your thoughts on that, like bridging that gap to technical schools? I know we always say, oh, go to a four-year college. And I think that message has become bigger than maybe you might want to attend a technical school, get your electrician's degree, learn a skill, learn a trade, because those fields actually do pay good money.
Yes, they do. And I think Georgia sort of tries to push people in that direction by allowing the Hope Scholarship to cover some of the technical school costs. And we need to do more of that, because we are running short of electricians. We're running short of plumbers. We're running short of HVAC people. And that's why their services cost so much, because there is a shortage, and so they're in high demand. And we need to promote more people who, if you don't want to go to college, at least there's something else that you can do that can provide you a good income.
That's true.
How do you feel about charter schools? Because Georgia, education has been important to Georgia for a very long time. And Georgia, I think, when it was first ranked in like the bottom 5 of all the states, I think in terms of test scores, I think that's when all the money started flowing into what Georgians should do about education. And Hope is not available in every state, so that it is great to think that you can be a resident somewhere and get to go to college. But what about the quality of education, or like the curriculum of education for elementary school kids, for middle school kids, like in those demographics you were talking about at the top of the hour, that time frame that's so important to you, where you spend a lot of time in extracurriculars? What about the quality of education on top of, never mind what you can do with it, but what about just quality?
I think the quality, it depends on us taking the reins off the teachers. When they don't have to teach the test and they can teach their children properly, teach them concepts, teach them how to think, the quality of the education is going to go up. When it comes to charter schools, I'm not in favor of vouchers. And the reason I say that, because in most places where charter schools are and you have vouchers, the vouchers take money away from the public schools. And right now, our public schools are financed through property taxes. So if you're in a poor district, any money that you lose is it's the difference between a billionaire losing $100 and somebody who makes $100 a week losing $100. That's the difference. So it's very important that if we allow vouchers for charter schools, that those vouchers do not take away from the public schools, because we can't afford to take money away from our public schools where kids are actually sharing books. Kids don't have access to social media while in school. There's a lot of things that if you live in a good school district, you have so many much more advantages because of the fact that your parents pay property taxes at an overwhelming amount compared to other places. And I think it's critical that the federal government has Title I, and the Title I is supposed to sort of fill out the differences here to make sure that all the kids are at least getting a minimal education based on a certain amount of dollars. And we're failing at that. We're not providing that money to those schools to make up that difference that you see between the high tax districts and the low tax districts. So we need to make sure that we're providing that money to make sure that everybody has an equal opportunity to do good in school, and then from doing good in school, it fosters those other opportunities for college and things like that. Teachers are probably our most important resource, because if we have good education, we tend to attract more businesses, we tend to spend more money in the economy, we do a whole lot more because of our good educational resources than we do if we don't have good educational resources. So I think it's critical that on the state level and the federal level that we look into making sure that's going to happen and happen properly. There's nothing worse than you see a kid, and I'll take Cobb County for instance. Cobb County, you see kids that live off of Six Flags Drive. Tax district is very low. Schools are very poor. They don't even have supermarkets close enough to provide fresh food and things for their children. So it really makes a difference on how that kid gets his start in school, what he's able to do. Because if you're thinking about what you're going to eat, if you're thinking about helping mom and dad make the bills, you're not thinking about school, you're not doing your best. When I was in the Army, I was a recruiter for a little bit of time in Texas. And one of the things that I did was, I talked to kids about joining the military and giving them the entrance exam, the ASVAB. Well, lots of times I would have a kid come up to me and he would do poor on the ASVAB. And, I would say, okay, why are you doing poor? And a lot of it was because he was from a poor school district that didn't require a lot. Not that he wasn't smart, he just had not been exposed to what he needed to know. And there's a big difference, because we have a lot of kids, if you expose them to math, if you expose them to science, if you expose them to technology, they don't have a problem learning it. But they got to be exposed to it and not put it at a disadvantage is what we see most of the time now.
See, that's the key for me. And I grapple with a lot of this, which I know sounds very much like a millennial, but I always ask myself that bigger question of like, okay, they used to say, and we have Common Core now, but it was such a huge concern for people and for parents that the quality of education seemed to be so substandard. And there are a lot of people with high school degrees or people who've gone ahead and gotten the equivalent, people who've gone to college who may seem or are, maybe barely literate in a lot of ways. I don't know our president, and I really, but there has been an example cited that his IQ may be relatively low, could be beneath 70. I'm just saying. But he's the first person to remind you how educated he is, technically, and that he's been to Ivy League schools. So I've always kind of questioned whether or not you can call, education knowledge, whether or not those are the same thing, and definitely feel like we have enough evidence to know that education definitely doesn't mean success either. Or at least, financial independence or level of financial stability. I feel like why isn't there the opportunity? I feel like the disaster of the education system is a great opportunity to start over in a lot of ways. Everyone doesn't have exactly the same skill sets, and I love the idea of technical schools just because I love the idea of teaching people, especially when you're in high school and when kids are going into college and they are technically adults, to start focusing less on doing things and being a part of a system and having a schedule and having the kind of confines that don't exist in the real world when you're in it, when you have to self-govern. We don't teach kids to self-govern. We don't teach them to be critical thinkers. We don't ask them questions. We don't put them in places of responsibility. And then when they turn 18, they sign a document for a loan of $50,000 or $60,000. And then they're expected to, we'll figure it out. This was your obligation. You signed up for it. So why can't you do something with it? Well, because we haven't been teaching kids to do things. We've been teaching them to sit and to follow an instruction. So, I mean, Georgia is the way that it is, and in the 11th district, you'll only be able to do so much with that. But I think we do have, even in Georgia, so many different technical schools or vocational schools. So is there any options for kind of pushing people more that way? Even if we just focus on college, we leave public school alone, we leave, primary education alone. Is there a way to kind of push people in the direction to pay more attention to a trade or to pay more attention to a specific task rather than a publicly funded college?
Well, I think the big thing is offering them an incentive to move in that direction, because we have a lot of young men and women who don't want to go to college. And then the question is, okay, what do you want to do with your life? Well, you don't have any skills, so the next best thing is to go to a technical school. But how do we get them through the technical school? Well, if we have the Hope Scholarship provided for the technical schools, just like it does for regular college, lax up the requirements to get the Hope Scholarship a little bit for those who are willing to go to technical school, because it's critical that the incentive to go is provided so that they will move in that direction. If you don't allow the incentive, then many of them are happy just sitting at home or just flipping burgers. I think as we see now, many kids are staying at home longer and longer than ever. And many of them are just happy just getting by without their parents telling them, yeah, you need to move out, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. When I was 18 years old, my father made it clear, you're either going to college or you join the military, but you're not staying in my house.
Yeah, I think that was the Black Father mantra, that was the running theme.
Gotta go.
That two older men cannot live in the same house. And once you become 18, you became an older man.
Yes.
So you can't stay in the house. So I absolutely agree.
And then one other thing, too, is, many people, they put the military down, but the military has a lot more jobs, job skills than just fighting wars. And so that they need to look at that as a short-term means to say, okay, I can go get this job skill, get paid while I'm doing it, and then have the qualifications once I leave the military to take this job to the civilian world. So that there's a lot of things that people just don't look at because they haven't either been exposed or somebody's put it down before they had an opportunity to think about it.
Sure.
One quick thing that I will ask you, because we talked about this a little bit earlier, and you said it's a question of people having things to do. And I don't want to make this too broad because there's an opioid crisis, so that there's a big drug question. But the alternatives that you kind of mentioned, when either certain pieces aren't there in the home or when people can't find something to do, is that they can fall into crime. And right now, you've not only served for so many years in the military, but you've continued public service, working in the Solicitor General's office, but working as a prosecutor.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to kind of understand what your interaction has been, even in Cobb, because this is where you're going to be. And just so everyone's a little bit aware, the 11th District is not just Cobb. I think it's referred to as the Cobb District a lot, and Barry Loudermilk also has referred to it that way, which explains that. But Cobb County demographics are skewed, but even more so in every place else in the 11th District. Like Cobb, I think, is almost 70% white Caucasian. Bartow's 81%, Cherokee's 86%. Vinings is over 80%. Like, it's a very, very, for Atlanta Metro to be considered, a majority minority area, these are probably the most European parts of this area. So I kind of wanted to ask you about your experience as a prosecutor, the people that you've seen, and kind of what you understand to be the case when people have had incidents with the law, not just their education, but kind of everything else too.
One of the things that I'm passionate about is criminal justice reform. When you step in a courtroom, most of the time you see mostly minorities in the courtroom. And the reason for that is because minorities tend to wait or don't hire their own attorneys. While our European citizens, they're more apt to hire an attorney and have that attorney represent them in court, and then they don't come to court until they have to. Now, when you look at our DUI court is a good mix and more representative of what the county actually looks like. The regular court, even though you see mostly minorities, I don't think there's that much of a difference in minorities being arrested versus Caucasians being arrested. What happens is just what you see in court, not what actually happens. And as part of criminal justice reform, I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to make sure that we faithfully and fully subsidize our public defender offices to make sure that they have the ability to, if somebody wants a lawyer, that person can have a lawyer. We need to make sure that our defense bar is prepared, and Cobb County has a great defense bar and a great circuit defender's office. But I think they need more money in order to actually bring down the perception that there's only minorities in the courtroom. And I always tell people, you know, your perception is your reality. So when you come into the courtroom and all you see is minorities, the first thing you think of is that the criminal justice system is unfair, because that's all you see is people who look like you. It's not quite that bad in Cobb County. But I think being able to have the public defenders representing, preparing for the defendants would change that perception just a little bit, so that they know that, hey, it's just not us getting in trouble, but at least we have a lawyer who's going to fight for us, is going to make sure that this is a fair situation. Because the one thing I hate is when somebody comes to court with a serious case and they decide that they don't want to get a lawyer. And I try to tell them, you know, you're at a distinct disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
I had a young man come in the other day and he said, well, I've been doing my reading. And I said, well, I've been to law school and been practicing for 10 years, so I think I know a little bit more than you do. So it behooves you to probably get you an attorney to help you out. Because there's some cases that you know the person may be guilty, but something may have been done wrong that could alleviate the charges on the person. And as a prosecutor, you don't have to tell them anything. You just have to provide them all the evidence and let them figure it out themselves. Well, if they have a lawyer who knows what he's looking for, it makes it that much easier.
So, and that's a really powerful point, because there are a lot of minorities who do not seek counsel. And just as a disclaimer that I'll go ahead and say, unqualified, I think you need a lawyer for almost everything that you do when you leave your home every single day. Yet there are a lot of statements people make, especially in our interactions with police officers on a regular basis. Don't say that. You need a lawyer to say that. You're at the doctor's office, you should have a lawyer. But so you said, you know, as a prosecutor, there's very little that you kind of have to do by way of working with someone who's been, I guess, either charged or found themselves in a situation where they're before you or on the opposite side of you. And you had an interview with, I think, Laura Lee Magazine last month.
Mm-hmm.
And you said something to the effect of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you really appreciate the wide amount of discretion prosecutors have.
Right.
And I'm very passionate about criminal justice reform as well. That's probably my number one issue, and there's lots of different pieces to that. Prosecutorial misconduct is a big piece of that as well. I can't speak for Georgia, but in lots of different places. Can you break that apart and kind of explain, A, what you mean by discretion, because that's a really big word, and then why in Cobb County that is particularly important?
Well, in Cobb County, you see a lot of cases where an officer may have done something that you know is illegal. And I'm not saying this happens a lot, because it doesn't happen a lot. The officers in Cobb County are very good officers. But you get charges in, and I'll give you an example of a charge. At a young man who came to court, and he was charged with obstruction. His son was living with him, and his son brought some drugs into the house. So he promptly kicked his son out. Well, here in Georgia, if someone is living with you, you have to actually give them notice and allow them 30 days.
That squatter's right crap. Oh my God, I hate that. Is the worst thing ever. I get it, but it's the worst thing ever, because like if you get mail, if they get mail to your house, or if there's a space for their belongings in your house, you have to legally evict them. It's the craziest thing.
You have to legally evict them. So the officers told him that unless you do the legal process, you have to let your son back in the house. Well, he's told the officers no, so the officers arrested him for obstruction. When the case came to court, I looked at it. I said, "You threw your son out. Why'd you throw him out?" And he said, "Because he brought drugs up in my house." Oh, I would have threw him out too. And I dismissed the case. I have that kind of discretion that if I feel that the facts don't meet the charge, or that the person is innocent, or even in a case where there may be jury notification, we can dismiss the charges. You know, we also have the ability to bring additional charges if the facts warrant those charges. So we have that type of discretion. We have the ability, if somebody is poor, somebody gets picked up for panhandling, they come to court, you know, what are we going to find a panhandler? Why are we going to find somebody who's a panhandler? It doesn't make no sense. He was out there trying to get money to begin with. So, you know, either dismiss the case or just say, okay, credit time served, released on time served. So all he does is the jail time he does. No paying fines or probation or anything like that. So we have that kind of discretion. If we find a situation where a family is in trouble, you know, you're homeless, maybe you got cited for loitering because you had to park your car and this is where you stayed for the night. You know, we can dismiss stuff like that because we have that type of discretion. My boss, Barry Morgan, basically, he gives us a discretion unless it's something that's going to bring media attention, then we have to ask him for that kind of discretion. But in most cases, we have the discretion to do either charge or not charge.
So you probably agree with the libertarian view then that there are probably just too many laws, because if someone is homeless and can be charged with loitering, or someone's walking down the street and can be charged with impeding traffic. I mean, if people can end up before you in the first place, and you can say, you know, reasonably that this just is not something that we should penalize this person for, then do we have too many laws? Or do we have too many criminal laws? Do we have too many civil infractions, traffic regulations?
Well, our society is based on litigation. You know, people, you know, it's just like you hear in the news where somebody calls, somebody was barbecuing in their yard and the smoke was coming to their yard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, who calls the police about something like that? We have got to the point where instead of talking to one another, that we'd rather call the police to iron out our not iron out our disputes, but to enforce our thought process of what we think should be going on, and that's a problem in this country. Lots of the laws are in place for egregious reasons to keep those things from happening. But when we have somebody who's sleeping in a car in an apartment complex because that's the only place they can park, that's not a reason to call the police. You know, you have somebody who's barbecuing on their yard and because you don't like the noise that they're making, that's not a reason to call the police. We've got to get out of that we're using the police to be our enforcer. And most officers, if they have the ability to provide discretion because somebody's not crying and whining all the time, they will do that. But when somebody continues to whine about what the law is, then they have to uphold the law.
Sure. And I've seen the argument made now, and there's legislation being drafted now, or policy writers who are helping to do that right at the Southern Center in downtown Atlanta, Southern Center for Human Rights, to kind of impose something like Norway has, where there are fines for that now. So for the peppermint patties of the world and people who just enjoy calling the police, or just want to call the police
Peppermint
as their own little
patty.
show of force, yeah, they fine you. If the police come, they can see that there's nothing wrong, that there is no danger, and then you could have potentially pulled 1 or 4 units away from an actual crime, from a situation where they could have been needed. You can be fined in some countries. Would you support something like that?
I would definitely support something like that because we have a lot of false crimes being reported. We have a lot of people getting arrested for not committing anything but other than somebody not liking who they are. When you get arrested, 1, you have to bond out. 2, you have that arrest on your record. 3, you're probably going to have a lawyer in order to get this charge dismissed. And then 4, how much money are you going to come out of your pocket for something that shouldn't have happened in the first place? And that's why it's a big issue when people report false crimes. And you know, and I'll say this in reference to domestic violence, not to say there's an overwhelming report of false crimes and domestic violence, but for domestic violence, one of the things when I prosecute a domestic violence case, I always tell the victim, whether it be man or woman, that you know, this isn't the first time. This is probably not the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth time. This is the time where you finally had some fear that this person might really hurt you. Now, either we're going to prosecute and you're going to make that person get help, or it's going to continue to happen and maybe next time you won't be able to get help. And so when people report false crimes on domestic violence, it really tears me up because there's too much real stuff going on that deserves attention of the courts versus those who are just mad at somebody because either they're with another girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever. So we in cases like that, I think definitely there should be some fine for making a false report.
I agree. All right, so we're in the second hour now. So this is your hour. So I'm gonna let you start with your platform. So what are the issues you're running on? What are your thoughts on certain things? This is your hour, so we'll just kind of ask questions as you put everything on the table.
Okay.
So it's all yours.
All right, you know a little bit about my background, 26 years in the Army, 10 years at Cobb County as an attorney. I've also worked with Veterans Court in Cobb County as a Veterans Court coordinator. The reason that I'm running, as I said before, is because I think I can make a difference. This country has been so divided, and I'm not just talking about in the past 2 years, but probably the last 10 years, we have been divided based on race, based on conservatives versus liberals, based on parties, Republicans versus Democrats. I always try to tell people that when we actually sit down at the table and actually talk, we're so much more alike than we are different. And that's where we need to focus on what we are alike and what the same thing, the things that we want, because we all want the same things. We want good schools for our kids. We want good education. We want opportunities. We want good jobs. We want better wages. We all want those things. So we can get together and we can work on it. It doesn't matter who proposes it, whether the Republican proposes it or a Democrat proposes the legislation. If it helps our constituents, we should be willing to vote for it. My goal is to be the voice of the constituents of the 11th Congressional District. And what I mean by voice is I plan to have town hall meetings once a month so that way you can come talk to me, and we'll spread those out between Bartow, Cherokee, and Cobb County. Also, to listen to you when you say you need something, what it is you want. And then make sure that if it's something I can't fix or something that I can't work on, I'm going to tell you that right up front so that way there's no expectation. But if there's something that we can make a proposed legislation to help that particular person or the constituency of the 11th Congressional District, then we're going to work forward to that. Veterans is critical for me. Being a vet, seeing how we've treated our veterans after they've come back from war. In combat, I lost 4 soldiers in combat. I've lost 6 since I've returned from combat to suicide. And I think that's the wrong answer. And the reason that's wrong is because we're spending all this money to send troops to war. We're training them to fight. We're training them to win. We're training them to come home alive. But when we release them out of the military, we're not training them to go home. We're not training them to prepare for a life after the military. I was lucky. When I joined the military, I knew I wanted to make it a career. But I knew at one time I was going to have to get out. So I started preparing myself through education to get out of the Army. A lot of these young kids are coming in at 17, 18 years old, and they're out at 21 or 22. And boom, all of a sudden, they go from being this hard-charging soldier, somebody depending on them, somebody needing them for everything that they do, to coming home, and the world has changed for them. When you come back from war, it's not the same. Everybody's grown another year. Everybody's assumed new responsibilities. All of a sudden, you feel like you're not needed. And that's the worst thing a soldier can feel, is to feel not needed. And that's why it's important that we have the Veterans Administration provide, or Veterans Affairs provide mental health counseling, provide health care for these soldiers, to prepare them to leave the military, prepare them while they're out of the military, so they don't seek other ways to rid their lives of all the problems that they're having.
So do you think something needs to be created specifically to cater to those needs, or we just need to maximize what we already have in position?
The problem we have is we've already maximized what we have in position. The VA needs more resources, and we need to provide more money, provide more clinicians, provide more resources for the VA to do the job that they've been asked to do. Nobody expected that in 2001 we would still be in Afghanistan in 2018. Nobody prepared for that. Nobody thought that through. And, you know, I fought in Operation Iraqi Freedom. And while I was there, I questioned why we were there. I questioned our administration that if we had gave all those resources to Afghanistan, we wouldn't be in Afghanistan anymore. The soldiers that we enlist, the sailors, the airmen, the Marines that we enlist today, all of them know for a fact that they're probably going to go to war. They've all raised their hand knowing that, hey, this might be the last thing I do because I'm going to go to war. Some point in my military career, I'm going to go to war. We have to reward those soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines when they come back home to make sure that they're taken care of, that they're provided for, that they have a future outside the military. The fact that we have homeless veterans is just doesn't make sense. The VA provides housing vouchers for veterans, but they don't, as soon as they get them, they run out. And once they run out, and it's till next October, the next fiscal year, that they have to wait to get more vouchers, while instead we have more veterans on the street. We have active duty military people who are on food stamps. Now that doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of wages are we paying our military that some of them can go on food stamps? We should be ashamed of ourselves to that fact. We're not providing for them like we should, and we need to do so much more. That's why veterans are so important to me. One of the reasons why I went to the Veterans Court as a Veterans Court coordinator was to help veterans who had gotten in trouble with the law and providing them treatment and instead of incarceration. And veteran court programs all over the country are doing great things. In Cobb County, Judge Reuben Green is doing a fantastic job with our Veterans Court. And every time I talk to those guys and talk to those veterans, these are life changes for them, that they've gotten in trouble with the law, and I'm talking about some serious trouble in some of the cases, but it's all related to their military service, the mental health issues, the substance abuse issues that they've had coming out of the service that didn't get treated while they were in the service. And now they're finally getting an opportunity to get treated for those things so they can make sure that they can return to society and be a contributing member to our citizenship.
So, and I was going to say right there, so I really thank you for your service. I sincerely thank you for your service. I don't think that active duty and veterans get enough respect. I don't think that there's any real infrastructure for life after you've served. And even economically, I don't think a lot of African Americans know that this really is how a lot of African Americans become middle class. It always has been and still is. It is usually the key to financial stability for a lot of us. But the issues around military and around service and even around the VA system, we usually hear a lot of that from Republicans. It's usually one of the only areas that you hear Republicans talk about how much more we need to spend or why we need to spend more. I mean, it's like the only way to get them to really, talk about a demographic that needs our help in a sincere way. So I want to know why you, rather than Barry Loudermilk, should represent the 11th Congressional District. Like, what do you believe is lacking, or why do you believe that you would represent that better, this being such a key issue for you?
Well, just like I said in the beginning, the things that we're hearing coming out of Washington, the fact that in our district, he's not there for the people to talk to. He's not there to hear their concerns and see what is really going on. He's not accessible, is what I've been told. And you can see that, you mentioned the opioid addiction epidemic here in the Tri-County area. If you look at the opioid addiction, they just passed a bill in the House to provide extra funds for the states to provide for opioid addicts for treatment and things like that. Well, it overwhelmingly passed. Overwhelmingly. There was only 14 no's. One of those no's was Barry Loudermilk. So that tells me you are not concerned about what is really important to the people you serve. If you're going to say, no, I'm not going to provide money for our addicts, then you have an issue. There was a farm bill that was passed probably about 4 or 5 months ago. The bill was, it didn't pass. The farm bill didn't pass. The bill was designed to help farmers get mental health treatment. Because whether people know it or not, farmers have the highest suicide rate in the country.
Really?
Yes, farmers. He voted no on that bill to provide mental health coverage for them. So when you're not looking at your constituents, when you're not listening to what their needs are, when you're not preparing legislation to promote their needs, you don't need to be in office. He's either sponsored or co-sponsored over 360 bills. 17 of those bills have become some type of law. 8 of those 17 have been related to naming a post office or a federal building after somebody. The other,
seriously?
yes. The other 9 have been to repeal Obama executive actions through the EPA or through regulations to withdraw those regulations to help businesses make more money. So he's not really focused on his constituents. He's not really looking at, one, the health of his constituents. Rolling back some of those EPA regulations, there's a plant out in Cherokee County. It's a nuclear plant. Rolling back some of those EPA restrictions or EPA laws has really put that plant in a position where it can become a danger to the area that it's in. It's allowed them to lax as far as their cleanliness, as far as their safety. Those things affect people in our district. And so when we roll back, or want to say we're going to roll back the carbon emissions standards, we're going to roll back the water cleanliness standards, we're going to roll back all this stuff. Yeah, it allows businesses to make more money because they don't have to worry about as many costs. But what are the long-term effects of those things? The long-term effects are people are not going to be as healthy. People are going to get sicker. People are going to be out more. People are going to die quicker. And all that means is people are going to be less productive. And if we have less productive people, we have a slower economy. And that's why when you look at the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, it's critical that those coverages that it mandates are in effect, because it allows for all the care, I'm losing the word that I want to use, what's the word? The care you get before you get sick.
Talking about
Preventive.
oh,
Preventive. The preventive measures that it has for preventive care. If we take away all that stuff, when people get sick is when they go to the doctor. But if we allow physicals, we allow checks and all those things to be in place and for them to be free, even without co-pays, people can stay healthier. We can catch stuff earlier so we can make sure that we don't have prohibited costs at the end. And for many families, their medical bills are what's really hurting them financially. And when it comes to bankruptcies, that's what most people are trying to get rid of, their medical bills.
So how much, I agree with you in a lot of ways, but how easy is it going to be to really push that far? Because like John Lewis is in the 5th and he's been there for a very long time. And I think he'll be there as long as he would like to be there. But if you look at his record, post-civil rights record, like his recent record, he has only been able to do so much. And that's the case for a lot of Democrats because it's Georgia and you'd still be a minority. So if you're in the 11th, and you've gotten past that, how easy is it going to be to deal with, I think, seven people who are probably going to be on the opposite side of that? Like how do you feel that you'll be able to kind of to bridge that gap or to get anything substantive signed and kind of agreed upon?
Which also, before you say it, let me throw out some little facts about your opponent.
Yeah,
so Laudermilk has been representing the district since 2015. The district went for President Trump in 2016 by a margin of 25.1 points. Trump won Georgia by 5.1 points. Georgia has 14 House seats, four are held by Democrats, 10 by Republicans. So that is a very good question.
Well, I think it's all about relationships. It's an understanding that all of us, all 14 of us from Georgia, that we're there to promote and have things, fix things that affect our constituents. If we promote something, and I'll say, if the Republicans put something on the table that's going to help the constituents of the 11th Congressional District, I'm going to vote for it. If I put something on the table that's going to help everybody, I'm hopefully going to be able to bridge the gap, talk to them and say, hey, look, this is why we need to vote for this. Whether it's a Democrat or Republican, it needs to be something that says if it's going to help our constituents, we all need to vote for it. And I think if we say something is going to help and they're not ready to accept it because it came from me or it came from another Democrat, then they need to be called out for it. And it's critical that people understand that your congressman is your voice. Your congressman there is to represent you, to fulfill your needs, your wants, to make sure that everything that he does that affects you, that he votes in the proper way. And I think we've gotten away from that because what we see now is most of our congressmen are all into self-interest. They're all into big business interests. Wherever they feel that they can get the money, that's where they respond. And that's the wrong answer. It's going to take a mindset of change of the people that we have in Congress. But the only way we can do that is by voting, and voting for those people who we know have a history of doing what's right for the people that they represent.
All right, on that note, we're going to take our second break. So everybody stick around this Friday edition of the Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D. Rice.
You're listening to IBNX, IBNXradio.com. The station with the best music. Best music.
I love the music.
Best music.
Hey, what's up? It's Jay-Z.
Hey, I'm Mariah Carey.
Hey, it's Katy Perry.
It's your boy T.I.P., man. Get it. It's your boy Sean Kingston.
What's up, y'all? I'm Beyonce.
This is Nicki Minaj, and I'm in the mix with
IBNX Radio.
Say that you're wonderful, but it doesn't seem good enough. I can say that you're kind, but that would miss the mark. I can say that you're beautiful, but to me you are so much more. How do I communicate exactly who you are? I'm trying to convey the sentiment of my heart and say I really do appreciate the way you brighten up my day. I can't find the words to describe you. It would take a million years. It would take a million years to explain the way I feel. You are the epitome. You are the epitome of everything I'll ever need. I'm so in awe of you. Lord, you leave me speechless. Now if I had more time, I would go down the line and name all the things that captivate my heart. But clearly I'm not aware of words that can compare. How do I communicate exactly who you are? I'm trying to convey the sentiments of my heart and say I really do appreciate the way you brighten up my day. Oh, I can't find the words to describe you. It would take a million years. It would take a million years to explain the way I feel. Lord, you are the epitome. You are the epitome of everything I'll ever need. moments last. You may think that it's over, that your life is done. The best is yet to come. Don't sweat the challenge. Your battle's already won. Yeah. Listen, y'all. See, God writes the end before the story begins. Oh, he told me to tell you the best. As the author of your faith, he wrote a provision for you to win. You're a winner, you're a winner, you're a winner. Yeah. You ain't seen your best days yet. You ain't seen your best days yet. I don't care what people told you. You ain't seen no. You ain't seen your best days. Oh, well, my. You ain't seen your best days yet. Stay in the faith, my sister. You ain't seen your best days yet. Stay in the word, my brother, my brother, my brother, my brother. Your best days. Trust in no one. Would you deposit this word in your heart? You ain't seen your best days yet. No, 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 it's not too late for you to start. I want to encourage you. I just want to encourage you. You ain't seen your best days yet. Get away from negative words. Get away from negative people. Hear God speak to you. The best. The best. The best. Do you hear me? Oh, no. Oh, you're gonna run and not be weary. You're gonna walk and not faint. Oh, the best is on the way. I see you, eagle. I see you flying high. Ooh, you ain't seen nothing. You ain't seen nothing. You ain't seen nothing. I know you may think that you have, but God told me to tell you, you gotta keep on fighting. Keep on praying. You ain't seen nothing yet. No, 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 no. You ain't seen your best days yet. You ain't seen your best days yet. It's greater. It's stronger. It's gonna come.
All right, everybody, we are back on this Friday edition of the Leadership Room with your host, Ricardo D. Rice, and new correspondent,
Simone Cherie.
and our very special guest, Mr.
Flynn Broady.
All right, so when we left and went to break, we were in his hour. So we were letting him talk about his platform, the things that he holds near and dear, what he's running on, all that good stuff. So I will pass it back to you.
Okay, we talked about veterans. Let me address some criminal justice reform things. Georgia has done a great job in the past 6 years of implementing criminal justice reforms that hopefully will take many of the criminals, provide rehabilitation, and keep them from being recidivists. And we need to open that up to the nation and make sure that we're doing those things nationwide. It started off, first of all, like I said before, that our circuit defender and public defender office need to be fully staffed, need to be fully funded so that they can represent everybody that needs a lawyer. Second, when someone does go to jail, we need to make sure that we're providing them training, schooling, something that's going to help them once they leave jail. I was in judge's office this morning, and one of the things that we were talking about was that a lot of people, when they get out of jail, they really don't know where they're going. You know, it's similar to coming out of the military. Everybody's grown up, everybody's gone different directions. Now, where do you fit in? If you don't have any skills, what happens? You end up going right back to a life of crime, end up going right back to jail. Well, we need to make sure that we're putting in the investment, and I'll continue to say this, that upfront investment to provide for those who are in jail, in custody, especially nonviolent criminals, to provide them skills and opportunities so that way when they leave jail, they can go to a job, they can go to a stable place to stay. They can make sure they're put in an environment where they don't have to revert back to their old ways of being a criminal. Those things are going to be critical. And then a lot of criminal justice reform is what we talked about when it comes to schools. If we provide that upfront investment in our schools for our teachers, for our after-school programs, we don't worry about kids going the wrong direction because they grow up with good examples. They grow up with good mentors. They grow up knowing what's expected of them and don't need to go off into criminal endeavors to make ends meet. So there's a lot of different things that we have to do as far as our criminal justice system reform is concerned. And it all boils down to making sure that everybody's prepared to be a contributing citizen. One of the things that has been sprouting all over the country is accountability courts. Now, what accountability courts do is, for like our drug accountability courts, they take those who have substance abuse issues and they provide the treatment for them, they provide the training for them, so that way when they get out of the accountability court, that they're prepared to go into the world with a job, with a stable housing, prepared to be contributing citizens. We need more of that because what we're seeing is the recidivism rate when we send somebody straight to jail is about 70 to 80%. With an accountability court, it's like 20%. So that's a big difference when you look at the numbers. And what does that mean? That means 80% more people are providing an income, an ability to stay, survive in this world, providing taxes for the economy, doing things that promote good citizenship, where when we just send them to jail, most of the time they just learn how to be better criminals. And so we
Okay, that's new. That's a new one. I've never heard that one, but okay.
But accountability courts are critical, and you know, we have accountability courts for DUI, we have accountability courts for drugs, we have accountability courts for veterans. We need to start reaching out even for maybe domestic violence offenders, doing things like that for them to provide them the treatment, the training that they need so they can keep from doing wrong. So criminal justice reform is critical. We need to reform our bail system. We need to reform our sentencing guidelines. All those things need to be changed because what they reflect is the war on drugs that we started in the 1980s. That has put a lot of people in prison for a lot of extended periods of time that shouldn't be there because they're not violent criminals. And what people don't realize is, you know, you want to lock all the criminals up. Well, guess who has to pay for that? We do as citizens. We pay for all that jail time. Accountability courts cost maybe $3,000 to $5,000 per year for each individual. Well, putting that person in jail for a year costs you $18,000 to $25,000. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather spend 5 instead of 25. And so that's why accountability courts are so critical. Our sentencing reform has to reflect the needs of our communities. We need to make sure that we're not locking people up who are not dangerous offenders for long periods of time, because all we're doing is we're putting them in a position where when they get out, they have no choice but to reoffend because they can't get a job, they can't provide for their family, they can't do anything in the real world. And I think the uncheck the block legislation,
Ban the box
legislation, those type of things need to happen, because if a person does not have a violent history, we should be able to send them forward to look for any kind of job that they qualify to do. Now, violent histories, that's a little different story, because if they're going to work around kids or they're going to work around the opposite sex, we need to know what kind of history they have as far as violence is concerned. So those are things that we need to work on. But we need to make sure that the perception isn't that all minorities are in court all the time, all minorities are the ones getting locked up. We do have in jail right now more minorities as far as percentage of the population than is actually in the population. So those things, we need to make sure that we correct those things, make sure that the war on drugs, it didn't work, period. It didn't work. And we need to make sure that our sentencing guidelines reflect that, okay, we're going to go in a different direction. We're going to go more in a treatment direction, so that way when people finish their sentences, that they're over their addictions, that they're ready and prepared to become good citizens.
So what can you do as a congressman about record restriction? Because that's one of the biggest pieces or tenets for me, is that it seems like if you have an interaction with the courts, if you become a part of the criminal justice system, it just never seems to end, because there's a paper trail.
Yes.
And even if it's not obvious to everyone, I mean, I think a $1.99 background check will let you know whatever that person did in middle school or whatever. And that can make employment very difficult. That can make a lot of, of jobs in certain sectors, whether it's financial sector, whatever someone may become very qualified to do once they're an adult, or even once 10 years or so have passed. And I like to think about the credit example. We talked a little bit about bankruptcy earlier, or even if your credit's in disarray. There's usually a 7 or 10 year window in which all of this stuff is supposed to fall off your record. But the criminal justice system does not work that way. It does not expire. So what, beyond ban the box, what would you be able to do as a congressman about record restriction?
I think, just like you said, the 7 to 10 year thing, we can propose legislation that says, okay, if you've got a misdemeanor, it only stays on your record maybe 3 years. If you've got a felony, if it's not a violent felony, it only stays on your record for 5 years. We need to be able to promote stuff like that, because I think it helps everyone. If you can show that, okay, when I was 18, yeah, I did something stupid, but now I'm 21, 22, and I've not gotten in any more trouble, why should what I did at 18 hurt me? And that's the way we need to look at things, because, all of us, me included, have done something that could have got us arrested at some point in our life.
What was that for you? What was your point?
I would say I'm not answering that question because everybody would be incriminated. So I'm not answering that question. So
I'm going to take liberty of my Fifth Amendment privileges for that.
But I kind of agree with her, like you, with the background we've heard. What could you possibly have done that would have gotten you arrested with the level of education and the military? Be like, you're the straight-laced. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of with Simone, but I digress.
I think the thing what most young people do is they drink before they're supposed to drink. And for all of us, if you do that before you're 21, you can get arrested for that. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that's what I did, but I'm just saying for most people.
Yeah.
So what about the White House? The White House sentence or prison reform bill? How do you feel about that? How do you feel about the Jared Kushner, who's supposed to spearhead criminal justice reform from the top down? That
bill is so hollow. It really has one thing in it, and that one thing is to provide a system where prisoners can be graded based on their likeliness to either reoffend or to hurt someone, and to sort of label them a specific number. Outside of that, it only talks about criminal justice reform. 80% of the money that's going to be appropriated towards that, according to the bill, is for this assessment system. And so to me, that makes it a hollow law because it really doesn't give you any structure for what to use to provide criminal justice reform. Basically, it just says, okay, we're going to set up this assessment system, and based on this assessment system, we'll be able to determine how long somebody should be or shouldn't be in jail. And 80% of the money for that, 80% of the money appropriated for that goes to building that assessment system and using that assessment system.
But let's just push there, because you talked about your discretion as a prosecutor. Judges also have discretion. Once someone is on parole or on probation, that officer can work with the courts to determine whether or not certain clauses need to continue after a certain amount of time. There's discretion, officers have discretion. At every corner of the system, there's discretion in most high places. So if we have over incarceration now, we've got too many people in jail now, or if we have mandatory minimums now that we agree are usually very egregious, do far more harm than good, then maybe why wouldn't a machine or algorithm be better than someone's personal judgment? Because clearly our personal judgment, we've got a lot of people behind bars.
I'm not saying anything is wrong with having an assessment system. What's wrong with that bill is that that's where all the money is going. So it's hollow in that it doesn't address any of the other issues that we're talking about. And you spoke about judges having discretion. Well, when you have mandatory sentencing minimums, it takes away that discretion for them. So that it says, okay, this is what you have to give that person. So boom, you've taken away the discretion. Now, they do have the discretion if the probation officer or parole officer says, hey, this person has done a great job while here, they've done this, and all these things. Can we release them early from incarceration? They have that type of discretion, which is great. I don't have a problem with the assessment system. I have a problem with the bill because it just doesn't address what we need to address.
But I think that's a running theme, because even when we were at the critical forum, they were talking about the fact that we get the money, but the way we distribute the money is becoming the problem. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on the way we distribute money? Like, is it going to the right places? Who's distributing the money? Let's start there. Who is, okay, we ask for money, the government gives us the money, so who's distributing the money? Well, I guess that's the question that most people are thinking about, like, who's distributing this money? I know it varies from department to department, but for the area you're going to be going into, who's calling the shots?
Well, basically, Congress appropriates the money that the president has asked for his executive agency to execute its job. The biggest problems that we have is bills are so narrowly tailored that, like in the assessment part for the criminal justice reform bill, that bill is tailored to go to a particular vendor, and that vendor is going to reap all the benefits for that bill. We need to make sure that when we do bills, we don't tailor them to a particular vendor. We tailor them to an overall objective of what we're trying to accomplish. Then we let the vendors tell us how much it's going to cost to make that happen, and then we pick the best vendor that's going to provide us the services that we need. We do a bad job of saying, okay, we're going to give you $50 million, but 25 million of it has to go to this certain category, and then that limits you, because in some cases, and a good example is when you have cities that say, okay, 25% of our contracts have to go to minority bidders. Okay, if there's only one minority that does that service, that contract is tailored.
They monopolize on the contract because they're the one that can do it.
Exactly. And so not only do you sort of, the other 75% gets distributed through a bunch of people, but you're really discriminating against that bunch of people, because this vendor here can get more of a big contract than everybody else who's getting only a small slice of the pie. Now, if you have adequate vendors to apply for the thing, yes, that's not a problem. But most of the time, it's not like that. And so bills are written, people will say, okay, in my district, I know they only have this, so I'm going to write a bill that's going to give this money for this, knowing that full well that particular vendor is the one going to reap the benefit. And that's where you see a lot, when you see campaign contributions, you see where these people are getting their money from, and you see how their policies reflect who they get their money from. And that's a problem, because those policies don't always reflect the needs of the constituents.
So would you be looking to serve on the Judicial Committee or the Justice Committee, or like Laudermilk, I think, serves on science, technologies, got a couple of, what areas would you be really trying to be a part of?
If I had a choice, the Judicial Community Committee would be one, the Veterans Affairs Community would be the other. Those would be my two primary ones that I would want to serve on.
So how could you get, and I'm just asking this, I think, as a bigger question too, because I don't know that everyone understands how important the midterm elections are. And also just kind of how important different offices are outside of the governor's race, which does attract a lot of attention. The governors and the presidents, for a lot of reasons, attract a lot of people's attention, but Congress is what really either pushes the sledge through the pipe or leaves it there, for like 99% of everything that we all end up so upset about. So what do you think can be done to kind of pull more people into paying attention to these types of races? Like Georgia doesn't do online voting. I think there's 20 states that do, DC does, Georgia doesn't do that. We have phone options when it comes to other areas. Like there's ways that you can call in for example, for parole or for probation. Like why can't we be more creative? Would that help more people to vote? Would that help more people to pay attention if they did not have to use post mail, snail mail, which I can't remember the last time I wrote a letter to somebody.
Okay.
To get something,
that?
yeah, and you have to here. So
Yes.
I mean, what can we be more creative? Would that help?
You know, I think you're right. With the technology that we have today, there's no reason why we can't reach each and every voter. We need to do a better job in our schools of teaching government, how government works, why government's important. With the technology we have, we need to be able to register online, register automatically when you get your driver's license. I think Virginia just did automatic registration. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do that. But what you find is here in Georgia, the conservatives, the Republicans believe that the more people that are registered, the more people that vote, the more they lose. And so they've done everything they can
to inconvenience us. So we're not going to give you the online options because we know that millennials are more tech savvy. So we create a hashtag, you can start a whole movement. So we're not going to give you those luxuries. We're going to keep you inconvenienced so that way you won't even feel like going to take off from your job to go vote or things of that magnitude.
Right. The more they suppress the vote, the more they feel that they can win. And our thing right now is we're trying to get as many people out registered as possible. And it's critical that if you're listening, if you're registered to vote right now, that you check your registration. Because Georgia just purged 1.5 million people off the voter registration rolls. A lot of those were for people who were deceased or duplicates, but over 800,000 were people who could have been current voters. And I guarantee you the margin of victory come November will probably be less than 800,000 votes. And so that's why it's critical that if you are registered, that you make sure your registration is good, you know where your polling place is, and are prepared to, hopefully early vote or absentee vote. But if not anything else, November 6th, turn out to vote. It's critical.
All right, so on that note, we're going to take our last break. And when we come back, we're going to start our wrap up with our very special guest, Mr. Flynn Broady, on the Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D. Rice.
Me calling your spirit, drawing me. Good and bad and joy and pain, they all go hand in hand. Often they play their roles at the same time. Confused, I don't understand. I don't do everything wrong, and I'm not always right. I keep it real with myself, that God is that greater than me, that lives in me, guiding me safely. I'm so unworthy. Are you calling me? Your spirit drawing me. Are you calling me? Your spirit drawing me. Even me. The thought can be overshadowed
Life comes at us fast. One thing that gives us comfort is knowing that someone is there when you need them. Well, at Pleasant Hills Insurance, that's our promise to our clients. Call 770-910-7460 today or visit our website at pleasanthillsinsurance.com for your free, no obligations quote on retirement and life insurance. Many of the large agencies have turned their back on the retired workforce. At Pleasant Hills Insurance, if others can't qualify you, very often we can. Pleasant Hills Insurance proudly provides options for preconditions. So call 770-910-7460 or visit pleasanthillsinsurance.com today for your free, no obligations quote on retirement and life insurance. Pleasant Hills Insurance, we're here when you need us.
All right, everybody, we are back on this Friday edition of the Leadership Minute with the host, Ricardo D. Rice, and my new correspondent,
Simone Cherie.
and our very special guest,
Flynn Broady.
All right, so we're in our last 12 minutes. So I'm going to let you do your wrap-up, all your important points. Your final, this is your Jerry final thought, like Jerry Springer. This is your Jerry's final thoughts. So it's all yours.
About the election. Talk to more people about the election, about what they need to do, what they can do to help you, your fundraising, everything that you're doing right there too.
Once again, the big thing is, I want to be the voice of the people of the 11th Congressional District. But in order to do that, these are the things I'm going to need. One, I'm going to need you to make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure that your registration is good. Make sure you know your polling place. Make sure you tell your friends about me. Make sure you go to my website, which is flynnbrodyforcongress.org. Make sure you go to our Facebook page, Flynn D. Broady Jr. for Congress. Make sure you just look and see all the different issues that we've addressed, all the different things that we've talked about, and just remember who we are as a people and why I've decided to run, because we as a nation need to make a difference. We need to step up, and we need to make sure we get rid of this narrative of hate. We need to change the narrative to a narrative of unity, a narrative of tolerance, a narrative that we're making this world better by doing things together, pushing ahead together, making sure that we're looking out for everybody, not just the rich, not just the big businesses, but for each and every individual in our community we need to be looking out for. We are looking at having fundraisers. We will do house fundraisers if you call our committee and let them know that you'd like us to come out and talk. We're always willing to do town halls. We're trying to set one up in Cherokee County now. We're trying to set up a venue in Bartow County also. We've got one coming up at Zion Baptist Church on September 20th. So you can come out and you can listen to us talk and ask questions. Anytime that you have a question that you want me to answer, just go to our website, leave a message, and we'll get right back to you to answer your questions. I'm not here to hide. I'm here to make sure that you understand that I'm your voice and that I want to be your voice going forward. I want to make sure that the constituents of the 11th Congressional District, the state of Georgia, the entire United States, that everything we do, we're promoting unity, we're promoting leadership, we're promoting our faith, we're promoting service in this country to make sure that we're doing right by each other. Let me give you this story, because lots of times we're so focused on who we are and how different we are. When I was at Veterans Court, in my off time, I used to do house closings as an attorney. We went to LJ up in the hills, up in the mountains, and while we were there, we went to this one house. When I pulled up to the house, it had a rebel flag on it. When I walked to the door said, "The South will rise again." And the first thing that came to my mind, what have I gotten myself into? Well, when I was sitting at the table doing the refinance for their mortgage, we started talking. They were actually cooking something, and I told them, that smells pretty good. And they told me, you're welcome to have some if you'd like. And at the time, we were fasting through the church. And their response was they were also fasting. That led to a conversation about God and country for about an hour. We had so much more in common than we had difference. And I think for all of us, when we sit down at the table, we all want the same things. We all want good schools for our kids. We want good homes. We want good neighborhoods. We want job opportunities. We want good wages. We want good health care. We want manageable health care. We want those things, and we all want them together. It should not matter what side of the aisle proposes it. If it's going to work for the members of the 11th Congressional District, for the state of Georgia, for the United States, we're going to vote for it. We're going to make sure that we get it passed whatever way we can if it's going to help us. Now, things that aren't going to help us, we're going to say no to them. We're going to say no to rolling back the regulations that protect our air, protect our water, protect our children. We're going to say no to those things because we should be saying no, because we have to look at our environment. We have to make sure our environment is prepared for our children growing up. I like the fact that I live in a place where I can walk outside and the air is clean, my water is fresh. You know, I like that, and I want that for my children. As a nation, we should be ashamed of what happened in Flint, Michigan. We should be ashamed of what happened in Puerto Rico, because we haven't done what we had promised ourselves that we would do. You know, our forefathers, when they built this nation, it was under the prospects that everybody has the right to have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. We need to get back on that track, and we need to make sure that we understand that our rights only exist as far as they don't interfere with someone else's rights. And if we start interfering with others' rights, it's time to pull back. That's why we need sensible gun laws. That's why we need to make sure we're helping our veterans, because they're the ones who protect those rights that we have. They protect our freedoms. They protect us from our enemies. We shouldn't be cohorting with our enemies, putting our friends down. We shouldn't be doing those things. We shouldn't be using bully threats to get nations to conform to things that we want them to do. That's not who we are as Americans, and we need to make sure that we change the narrative and promote who we really are. And that's all about providing for one another, making sure we've got the best of everything, and being the best of who we are.
I would just ask you, just really quick, if you could put a little bit more color behind, like speaking to the people that are in the counties that are not Vinings in that quarter. So people who are in Bartow, who are in Cherokee, people who, we're in such a partisan divided time right now that I think for a lot of people, it just becomes as simple as, are you a D or are you an R? And if you're a D, I'm just going to assume that all this stuff comes along with it. If you're an R, I'm going to assume all this stuff comes along with it. But you and I know, I think most people really believe that you need both. That yes, we need to understand who our enemies are, but we also need to understand what diplomacy is and when it should be used. So how do you kind of try to talk to people about the importance of looking at a candidate, not looking at a party, not looking at the incumbent versus the new person, depending on how you feel at the time? Like, how important is it for people to look at the candidate?
Well, I think it's very important, because what you need to understand is you need to understand who that person is. If all their life they've been a bully, if all their life they've always demanded what they want, if all their life they've only settled for the things that they wanted and only shown their own self-interest, that's not the person you want for your candidate. You want a person that understands that being in Congress is all about serving the constituents that voted you in, which means your actions, your responses, everything is dictated by the people you serve. If they need you to help them get better wages, then you should be proposing legislation providing better wages. If they need better health care, you need to be proposing legislation that provides better health care. Here in Georgia, we've had 7 rural hospitals closed down. What makes you think yours won't be next? And you need to understand that, you know, when we have health care policies at the state level or at the federal level that basically sabotage the policies that were put in place to help everybody, we have to understand that there's consequences to those things. So you need to understand who your congressman is, who he is, who's running against him, what do they stand for, how do they hurt me, how do they help me, and make sure that you understand that basically where their heart is. You know, is it in service or is it in self-promotion? If it's in service, then that's who you need to be voting for. If it's in self-promotion, then you have to understand that if that's what you vote for, that's what they're going to do. They're going to promote themselves. They're going to enrich their own lives. I'm running for Congress not because I want to get rich, not because I want to do this for myself, but because I think I can make a difference. All my entire adult life I've served, 26 years in the Army, 10 years at Cobb County as either a prosecutor or as a Veterans Court coordinator. All my life I've served other people. I've tried to help other people to make better who they are as a person. In my military career, every soldier that I've ever led will tell you that Sergeant Broady or First Sergeant Broady, basically he just wanted what was best for me. And that's what I want for the people of the 11th Congressional District. That's what I want for the people of Georgia. That's what I want for the people of this nation, is to be better people than we have been in the past. For us to know that when we work together, there's nothing that's unattainable. But we have to understand that, you know, there's going to be some bumps along the way. We're going to have to make some upfront investment for long-term goals. And then if we're not willing to stick with that, then we're asking for trouble. We need to stop playing the game where we're fixing what's on the radio, we're fixing what's on TV, we're fixing what's in the newspaper. We need to build this nation and prepare it for long-term success. And I think we can do that. You know, just a good example is, you know, when our veterans came back from World War II, they were given the GI Bill, they were giving home loans to make it easier for them to settle back into the economy and back into the nation. That put a big boost in our economy, put a big boost in what we see as suburbs now, what we see as jobs now, the education level of our citizens as a whole. We need that kind of upfront investment in our entire nation. And if we do that, there's no telling how far we can go. Right now, we've lost the title, the moral standard of the world, and we need to get that back. We should not be calling females dogs. We should not be calling other nations S-holes. We should not be looking to build a wall, and it's not a wall to protect, it's a wall of hate. And we need to change that narrative and make sure that we are who we say we are. You know, the Statue of Liberty says we'll take all immigrants. And why do we take them? Because we provide opportunity. We provide a better place for them to reach their goals. And that's who we are all about, and we need to get back to that. We need to stop looking at self-interest. We need to stop just placating big businesses because they're the ones providing money to campaigns. When we continue to do that and we leave the middleman out, we're really hurting this nation as a whole. Our wages are basically reflective of the 1970s as far as their buying power is concerned. And if you think about 40 years have passed since the 1970s, why are our wages still in basically no more worth than they were back then? It's because we've allowed big business to dictate that says, hey, we're going to basically pay our shareholders, we're going to pay ourselves, and as long as the workers got a little bit, they shouldn't care. But that's the wrong answer. We need to make sure that we're bringing people up by providing them good jobs with good pay, good benefits, and by doing so, we're going to alleviate a lot of the problems that we have in this nation.
All right, Simone, final thought, 30 seconds.
I think that you are an incredible background for a congressman to have served for 26 years and very well educated. I think that you would also make a lot of sense as a governor or as someone even outside of the 11th district, especially for you to be so middle of the road and maybe even more competitive against Kemp than Stacey Abrams would be, if I dare to say. So no, I love what you had to say about criminal justice reform. I definitely wish you all the best, and I think that Georgia definitely needs a little bit more of a divide than it's currently got. So wish you all the best.
Thank
All
you.
right, so special shouts out to the new correspondent, Miss Simone Price, who did an amazing job today. This is the first time I didn't have to ask a lot of stuff. I felt bad. I feel like I'm making her do all the work, but she's so good at it. And our very special guest, Mr. Flynn Broady, we wish you all the best, and we will definitely have you back around, win or lose, to talk about the campaign trail. So tune in Monday on the Leadership Blend with your host, Ricardo D. Rice. Have a great week.